What's threatening the most popular variety of banana, the Cavendish?
Sure. There are several varieties of diseases today that are negatively impacting the global banana industry. But perhaps the most immediate threat is a fungal disease known as tropical race 4. It has been spreading throughout the world over the last 30 years and has the potential of possibly eliminating the Cavendish banana production within the next few years.
How serious is that threat? Do you think that will really happen?
I think that the threat is serious. I think that it's definitely going to, the disease is definitely going to reach most banana production regions globally. And I will say more that unless there is found a cure for the disease or a way to overcome it, uh, it will put the industry in a position where it will suffer great losses within the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay, that's the industry. And what about the consumer?
I'd say eventually the consumer buys the banana from the industry. When I mean the industry, I talk about the growers, the distributors. If the growers are unable to produce the bananas economically, then eventually the consumers suffer as well.
Where is the fungus right now?
So it was first discovered in the mid 80s in Taiwan, and as it spreads globally, typically through with people. So a person who might be walking in an infected field someplace, and then the next day going and walking in another field, either by foot or through vehicle, he can spread the disease with him. So if you're looking over the last 30 years, so since the early 80s, the disease spread first in Asia, then over the last few years, primarily to India, the Middle East, Africa, and last year, in August of 2019, it was discovered for the first time in Latin America, in Colombia. Now that's it. It's a big issue because eventually, when we think of consumers as the Cavendish banana, about 85% of production for export is carried in Latin America in countries like Colombia, Costa Rica, Honduras, Guatemala, Ecuador. So the fact that the disease now arrived in Latin America, I think it brings the threat a lot closer to home.
There are a lot of CRISPR projects going on around the world right now. How did you come to decide to work on this banana fungus issue?
So I think before dealing with the TO4 fungi issue, we first of all, we started the company Tropic Biosciences in mid 2016, so a little over 4 years ago. I think when we started the company, my co-founders and I, one of the first questions that we asked ourselves is, which crops or which agricultural fields do we want to focus on? And for us, the tropical world was very attractive because we recognize that eventually it's a very massive portion of agriculture, eventually feeding or supporting economically a massive portion of humanity. And we also recognize that very few R&D efforts in the past have been dedicated towards these very important crops. And within the tropical world, we really it made a lot of sense for us to focus on banana for several reasons. So some of them you've already mentioned. This is one of the most important food crops globally. It's a massive export industry. I think there's also, kind of very close to most people's hearts. I had my firstborn about 2.5 years ago after we started the company, and I learned that I think most babies, the first fruit that they ever eat is a banana. But in addition to the banana being a very important crop, we also recognize that there is a very strong complementation between banana and the gene editing technology. I think eventually, if we think about gene editing, maybe the most relevant alternative to gene editing would be traditional breeding. Eventually, if you work on a tomato, for example, and if you have a disease, a fungal disease, then you have the ability to go to the natural variety, and there's literally over 20,000 varieties of tomatoes out there, and then you can start kind of choosing the varieties that are resistant, or even breed them into other varieties eventually to get the product that you want. With banana, it's not so much an option, because the banana that we consume, the Cavendish and many others, are asexual in nature. Eventually, they don't have viable seeds. Kind of what you have is what you, I don't want to say you're stuck with, because it is a very good banana, but breeding is not so much on the table. With that, we recognize that gene editing brings forward the potential to actually change the Cavendish banana in a very precise way to meet more modern challenges, one of them being the tier 4 fungi. I think earlier on we were undertaking more basic challenges with the banana, for example, how to extend the shelf life or how to reduce the browning of the banana post-harvest. But as we developed as a company, and we deepened our understanding and technological tools in order to attack more challenging issues, then it became apparent for us eventually that going after tropical race 4 and at least one additional very, very challenging disease, Black Sigatoka, is the way forward for us. And even though I recognize there's, it's good for humanity and for everyone that there are more and more people entering into this field. Eventually, I would say that for a very long time, it felt very lonely, because I would say the 70 people that are working at Tropic Biosciences, we've been a very strong and dedicated effort within the banana industry of implementing gene editing towards this goal.
How are you approaching the gene editing to accomplish that in the lab?
So I can say that there are many ways to approach that, but I will say that pretty much from the start, we've been licensing in a gene editing tool called CRISPR-Cas9 from the variety of its owners, for example, from the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard, as well as from Corteva, the giant American seed company. In addition, so we are implementing CRISPR gene editing on banana embryogenic cells. So these are single cells that once you edit them have the potential of them regenerating into a full-size banana that then can be cloned and implemented in the field. I would say that another component that has been very important for us is a technology that we've developed in-house called GIGS, which stands for Genome Editing Induced Gene Silencing, which is a tool that makes use of gene editing, for example, CRISPR or any other variety of gene editing, but allows us to use gene editing in a way that can promote a very robust disease resistance, for example, against fungi, against viruses, against pests. So I would say that eventually our approach combines both the CRISPR technology that we license in, as well as the GIGS technology that we use internally, as well as license out to external clients. So we begin with a Cavendish banana tree, high-performing varieties that are commercially available. From these trees, we know how to extract embryogenic cells. Maybe in the human context, that would be the equivalent of stem cell. So single cells on which we perform gene editing, so we know how to change the DNA within those embryogenic cells. And after we make the change, we know how to take these cells and grow them back into a fully functional banana tree. And then that banana tree gets tested to make sure that we have achieved the traits that we want to accomplish, for example, resistance to tier 4 disease. And then we can take these trees and multiply them to a commercial scale in the industry.
So you're taking healthy banana trees and making them resistant. We will not be able to cure infected trees. Is that correct?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't think that that's it's especially with tier 4. It's very hard because eventually the fungi is soil borne. So it's very hard to find ways to actually remove the fungi from the field. And we can elaborate on that. I would say that I think we did mention that TR4 is a soil-borne fungi. Moreover, once the fungi is in the soil, it can last in the soil for 30, 50 years. So, even if you come back again 30 years later and try to plant bananas there, they will also likely die soon after. And historically, there are different strategies of how to treat such diseases. And we already said that breeding is not so much an option with bananas. Other means can be chemical or biological. With treating Panama disease with chemicals is very hard, again, because the fungi is within the soil. So getting chemicals to affect that would be very challenging. Biologicals is a very challenging approach that has not been proven effective in this context in the past. So what we're doing, we're changing the genetics of the banana in order to make it resistant to TR4. I would say that curing banana trees, even though that would be very interesting, I would say from an industrial perspective, it's not a must, because if you have the ability to replant with resistant trees, you would just do it, because a banana tree, if you cut it out and replace it with a new seedling of a resistant variety, within 7, 8, 9 months, you will have a new harvest. So you're not really losing too much time. So yes, we are developing resistant varieties.
What kind of progress are you making in the laboratory or in the field?
So we're making quite good progress. I would say that specifically with TR4, this is a project that we've initiated internally towards the end of 2018. We've done a lot of gene editing work based on the tools that we've developed since 2016. Specifically with TR4, what we found to be most useful is actually to test the resistant trees not in the field, but in dedicated controlled testing rooms. Because once you have, for example, a resistant banana tree, it would be very hard to test for TR4 resistance in the field, because you really don't want to mess with the fungi so much. You will need to find a field that is already infected, and even then the infection can take quite a lot of time. For us, it's a lot easier to take these trees in a controlled room, currently what we're operating in Norwich, to manually infect them with TR4 fungi from our own stocks, and test from there the level of resistance. So we are now starting a very robust project of starting to test the trees that are coming from our gene editing pipelines in order to assess the level of resistance. So there's still quite a lot of tuning that needs to be done, but ideally within the next year or two, we'll have results that will show, okay, these are banana trees with I would say, sufficient resistance to the fungi.
So you may have resolved the problem at this point. It'll just take testing to reach that conclusion.
I think testing will be the answer. Hopefully, we have resolved it, but it's a long project. I think that out of the to really make sure that the likelihood of our success is significant, we are implementing several methodologies of gene editing to that aim. And over the next couple of years, we will cover a lot of these methodologies. I think we're just now the beginning of testing these plants. So hopefully we will have a solution, but time will tell.
Okay. When did Tropic Bioscience begin this work?
So we started working to the second half of 2016. I would say specifically with banana, our first wet work was towards the end of 2016, the beginning of 2017. We started working or developing our TR4 disease-resistant project say towards the end of 2018. And at this stage now, in August 2020, we are starting first time to test for resistance of TR4 in banana in our own facilities in Norwich.
So where are the plants that, where are you getting the plants that you're working on from?
So we have several sources. So we work with a few very good industry partners who are supplying us with plants, for example, from Israel, from Turkey, from Latin America. So we have ways to obtain the source banana material. And we also have the ability to work with these partners in testing eventually these plants in the field. With that, I will say that the large majority of gene editing work, which is proprietary to our company, is done in Norwich in the UK. Interestingly, actually, I would say working on TR4 resistance in Norwich, which is probably, I don't think that no one really grows bananas in the UK, and definitely not in Norwich, has a lot of benefits, because if we were to try and work with these pathogens in countries where they actually grow bananas, it would have been a lot more challenging. The fact that we work on bananas in a region that doesn't grow bananas gives us a lot of freedom to experiment with these challenging pathogens.
Who will your clients be, assuming that you create a solution to the fungus?
So eventually the clients are the banana growers, and there's quite a few of them, primarily in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, and in Africa. There are different ways to reach out to these growers, either through regional associations or through some of the big banana companies, which are quite well known. So we would like to supply seedlings to the growers, and depending on the region, there are different ways for us to do that.
From my reading, I think I've read that you have financial backers, so you are not a public company at this time. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Are there plans to go public at some point?
Again, not something that we are doing actively. I think that every morning we wake up and we focus on building the best company that we can. In the future, if this is something that makes it easier for us and better for us to continue our growth and work, then we will consider it. But currently, there is no active plan to do that.
By education, you're an engineer. You have a degree in industrial engineering. You were a ship commander in the Israeli Navy. I think you were also a venture capitalist. How did you decide to start a company to use gene editing technology across every sector of agriculture?
I'll start with the end. I will say that at Tropic Bioscience, we focus on tropic agriculture. I think that when we sat together in 2016 and thought about, where do we want to focus on, it's a very big world. It did make a lot of sense for us to focus on the tropic segment. And I mentioned earlier, it's very big, it's very important. It's probably maybe the fastest growing segment globally. But more than that, we felt that there was relatively very few R&D effort dedicated to it. And it was an effort and a responsibility that we've taken upon ourselves to really promote some of these groups through very advanced technology. How did I decide to do it? I think I was fortunate as a venture capitalist working in California and focusing on food and agricultural technologies as part of the fund that I worked for at Pontifex AgTech. We were exposed relatively early to gene editing technology. So I think we started looking at the different technologies probably in, I want to say, 2014. We were fortunate to meet with several very sophisticated researchers in the field, including Jennifer Doudna, Dan Voitas, and others. And we ended up actively investing in the field in a fantastic company called Caribou Biosciences. But I think for me personally, the realization that there is a technology that really can be a game changer, have the potential of changing the way agriculture is conducted, coupled with the understanding that there might be some fields such as banana and coffee and rice that maybe for the first time the genetic tools have matured and have become commercially available enough to really be utilized to develop attractive crops. So that's what drove me to seek out my partners and build Tropic Biosciences together in the UK.
Together, bananas and coffee have a market value yearly of tens of billions of dollars. It's a huge livelihood for people around the world. What are you doing in the coffee space now?
So coffee, yeah, we like working on coffee, and maybe similarly to banana, I think you cannot really exaggerate of how important these crops are. So we mentioned that banana is the fourth most important food crop globally, but coffee likewise is the most consumed beverage after water. People consume about 1.52 billion cups every day, and there's about 25 million people who are actively cultivating coffee for their livelihood. So if you couple that with their families, there's about 125 million people on the planet that rely primarily on coffee cultivation for their livelihood. So I would say that I'm still amazed that there's so few people working on coffee and trying to solve issues there. So with coffee, I will say that when we chose the products that we wanted to develop in coffee, we ended up focusing on traits that are quite different from what we are doing in banana. For example, in banana, we do a lot of work on disease resistance. Whereas in coffee, even though there are quite a few diseases that are quite challenging for the industry, what made sense for us was earlier on actually to focus more on quality and processing traits in coffee. And to name a couple of examples. So one of the products that we're developing in coffee is what we call the low caffeine coffee. So if you think about coffee, one of the niche segments, and we're talking about probably 3 to 5% of the global coffee industry, has to do with low caffeine coffee. And if you think about how low caffeine coffee is made, basically large processing companies would take coffee beans, they would soak them in water, then steam out the water at a very high temperature, and with the temperature or with the steam comes out the caffeine. There are several challenges associated with it. One is that it actually requires a lot of energy, so it costs quite a bit of money to remove caffeine in this way. But secondly, the process is so aggressive that with the caffeine actually comes out a lot of the natural taste and health benefits of coffee. And as an alternative, what we're doing with coffee, we are basically knocking out genes associated with caffeine synthesis in the coffee beans. So the beans in the coffee grow already with a relatively low amount of caffeine. So you can achieve naturally what would otherwise be done through industrial means that have a negative effect on the taste and health quality of low caffeine coffee. So this is just one example of one of the things that we're doing in coffee. But there are other things. I'm happy to elaborate more if you're interested.
Shelf life?
Coffee shelf life less. I would say that the other thing very interesting that we're doing in coffee is what we call a high solubility coffee. And eventually, about 40% of global coffee consumption is done in the form of instant coffee. Through gene editing, one of the things that we can do is knock out specific genes that can promote and make the coffee bean more soluble in water. And as it becomes more soluble, it becomes easier to extract instant coffee from the beans. So allowing you to either increase instant coffee production yields or also to improve the quality of instant coffee. So these are traits that are primarily designed to support the coffee processing or coffee consumer feeling. They're quite, considering the magnitude of the industry, it's actually quite, these are very interesting products that they're developing.
You're working right now with these two products. You mentioned rice also, but given the volume of bananas that are consumed daily and the number of cups of coffee that people drink every day, there's a potential huge upside for your company.
Well, I wouldn't discount rice either. One of the things that we've learned over the last year is that rice accounts for about 20% of global calorie consumption. So maybe in my mind, I'm thinking that every fifth piece of food that someone puts in his mouth is rice. So I think we've undertaken projects with a huge potential for impact on humanity. And we're very proud of it, and we're making good progress. If we're thinking about the potential for upside, yes, it's tremendous.
Other people are trying to develop a transgenic banana, and I guess that means using DNA from another organism to stave off the fungus. Would that be considered genetically modified GMO and then perhaps unacceptable in some circles, especially Europe, whereas CRISPR is not?
So we're coming to discuss about. I will try to distinguish between two separate topics. One is science, the other one is regulation. And they are distinguishable because different forms of science in one country would be considered as GMO, for example, whereas in another country it would be considered as non-GMO. For example, if you today use CRISPR in a way that doesn't involve the introduction of foreign DNA, in one country, for example, in the US, it might be considered as non-GMO, whereas in another country, like the European Union, it would be considered as GMO. I will say that relatively broadly, it's very hard to make very strong generalizations in this, but the introduction of foreign DNA, as some organizations are trying, would probably be considered as GMO, I would say, almost across the entire board. I think the immediate effect would be that the regulatory pathway to introduce such products to the market would be very, very long. We're likely talking about multiple years, let's call it between 7 to 15 years, making it a lot less attractive, both from an industry perspective as well as for the developers themselves.
I was in Costa Rica in 2005. They were still talking about the blight, and I think it was TR4 in the 1950s that wiped out a different variety of banana, which was at the time the most traded in the world and has been replaced by the Cavendish. Now the Cavendish is at risk. Are you predicting a comeback for the banana in some of these countries like Costa Rica, which lost huge crops and huge revenue?
I can say that in some places in the world, not just in Latin America, we see, I would say even primarily in Southeast Asia, where the disease, the TR4, is already apparent, we see that some producers are migrating beyond the traditional production areas to other places because they have to kind of escape the areas that are already infected with TR4. I think that, Tropic Biosciences, we have about 70 professionals working today. I would say many of them are really world-class researchers and technicians, and we are very proud of our work. I think we've made a tremendous amount of progress over the last 4 years. I think we really feel driven and encouraged by the real need of our product, and the team is working night and day. The last few months have been challenging globally with COVID-19, and despite all the challenges, we never stopped working. We've been at it, realizing that this is too big of a problem for us not to give our utmost for it. So we're confident that we will come up with the gene editing bananas that is resistant to TR4 and to other diseases as well. And we would love to see it eventually reach the commercial market.